Okay, so in this part we are going to install Redux and hook it up to our app. So we already have a pretty decent app. So now let's go into our terminal and let's npm install Redux, React Redux, so we can incorporate Redux into our React project. And let's also install Redux Thunk. And Thunk, it's basically a middleware that will allow us to run asynchronous code in our action creators. So in your action creators, you can't run asynchronous code because your reducers will only accept an object, and the actions will always dispatch an object. So what the Thunk is, it's basically a middleware that basically operates between the action and the reducer and waits for the code to be run, and when it's run, it dispatches an action to our reducers. Okay, so now let's start configuring the Redux on our app. So here I'm gonna create, let's actually close all of this. And I'm going to create a new folder called store. And inside store, I'm going to create a folder called reducers and another folder called the actions. And I'm going to create an index.js file. And here is where we will be creating our store. Our store, it's basically our global state, okay? When we dispatch actions, they'll go to reducers, and the reducers will behave accordingly to that action, and then they will update our store. We can get our store on our components, okay? So now we're going to import compose, create store, and apply middleware from Redux. We also need to import our middleware, so import Thunk from Redux Thunk. And now we can start creating our store. We are going to use something that's called Redux DevTools, and this is basically a Chrome extension that you can install in your browser. I already have it here installed, and if you go to their documentation, they basically explain you how to configure it on your project. Basically, if you have a basic store, you do this, but advanced setup, when we are using a middleware, which we are, we need to use this. So what we can do basically, it's we copy this, we go to our code, and we paste it here. And now we need to do const store equals compose, create store, and this function, the first argument will be the root reducer, which we will create in a second. So root reducer, and the second argument will be compose in answers, and here we apply our middleware. In this case, it's Thunk. Okay, now let's create our root reducer. So if we go into our reducers folder, we can create a new file, and I'm gonna name it index.js, and here I'm gonna import combine reducers from Redux, and this is basically a function that allows you to combine multiple reducers into one. So now I'm gonna do export default, and I'm gonna use combine reducers, and here I'm gonna pass my reducers. I don't have any yet, but I'm going to create one. So let's create a new file, and for now, now we don't have any data. Let's just actually I'm gonna rename this to Auth reducer, And for now, let's just export default, and the reducer is a function that always gets the previous state and the action, so the action that we dispatch. Okay, and then for now, let's just return something like this is just temporary. Okay, so now we can go into our index and we can import auth reducer from go to our auth reducer, and here this function accepts an object, and this object you can name this is basically what will appear in your store. Okay, so basically we on our store we will have a key called the auth, which will have our state, our auth state. Okay, so on the first time that every reducer runs, so when your app first initializes, this will be undefined now, right? And it can't be undefined, otherwise we'll get an error. So what we can do is we can create a const called initial state, and we can say that, for example, it's an object. Okay, it can be. And now we say that the state, it's the previous state, or in case it's undefined, it's our initial state. So now here we are exporting only one reducer. Okay, we are combining, we only have one here, but in the future we might have more. So we combine them here, we set the name that we wanted to have, and we combine them and we export them. And on our store, we basically now can import root reducer from reducers. We don't need to specify the name because it's the index. And now we can use our root reducer here, and we have our store here. So now I'm just gonna export default store. So now that we have our store created, we can go to our main index file, and here we can import the provider from, and this is from React Redux, and this is basically a provider that will wrap our whole app and give it the store. Okay, because Redux is not only for React, it's a global state management library. So to work with React, we have to use this package, which is React Redux. And now here we can do provider, and we pass it to the store, which will be equal to our store that we need to import in a second. And now we can wrap our whole app in the provider. This is here, and now we need to import our store from, and we go into our store. Yeah, and since it's the index file here in our store, we don't need to specify it. Okay, and everything should be working, I guess. Let's try it. Okay, and you will see this lights up already, so this means that the extension is working. And if we open our DevTools here, you will have a new tab called Redux, and if you click it, you go to state, and you can see we have our state here. Right now we only have one reducer, so we have on our store only one, basically one key, and it's called auth because we set it up on our combined reducers, so here. Okay, and for now it's just a random text that we returned here. Okay, so one thing that we can do to improve this, it's on our index from the store. We are basically always activating our Redux DevTools. Okay, but basically when you export your app, you don't want people that have Redux DevTools to see the actions that you are dispatching and all of that. So what we can do here is we can basically check what kind of environment we are. So we have a thing called process Yeah, it's like this. Dot node env, and we can see if it's equal to development. If it's equal to development, we're gonna use this. Otherwise, we can just use compose. Okay. Okay, so now that we have our Redux working, let's start to set up Firebase. And Firebase has REST endpoints, so you can actually communicate with it through REST endpoints. So if you want to sign in a user, you can send you can use Axios to send requests. But I'm going to use a pretty cool library, or I mean package, I guess, that's called Redux Firebase Redux Firebase, I guess. React Redux Firebase, yeah, it's this one here. And it basically gives you access to the Firebase object in your action creators, and it also has some cool features that I will show you in the future. The documentation is pretty good. We're gonna to start setting up Firebase now with this package. It's a little bit confused, so I'm going to do it slowly. But if you follow the documentation, it's pretty okay. So let's go to Firebase. Let's go to our console, and here we can create a project. So I'm gonna call it to-dos auth. Okay, accept. And while this is doing, we can go to our terminal and we have to do npm install Firebase. Let's install also this package. So React Redux Firebase. And we are going to use Firestore also, which is basically a database from Firebase. So we also need to use another package. Where is it? Yeah, Redux Firestore. So Redux Firestore. Let's install these 3 packages. And let's see if our project is okay. Now here we are going to go to Authentication and sign in, and we can already activate the email for now. And on our databases, we can create a Firestore. Let's do it in test mode for now. And let's wait for it to finish setting up. And besides using Firestore to also store our to-dos, we will actually use it to store user information too, because when you sign in a user, you will get a unique ID and his email will be stored here. But we also want to store his first name, his last name, and you can also store more information like photo or something else. So in our database, besides having a collection to our to-dos, we will have a collection to our users. And you don't need to create this because we will create it automatically when you send a query. If it's not created, it will create automatically. But basically, the document ID will be the unique ID that we will get from Firebase when we sign up a user. Let's just use a random one right now. And here we can have then like first name, and it will be a string, okay? And we will have last name, that will also be a string. And you can store more data here, because this package that we are using will basically, we will set up it in the way that the package automatically, when your app loads and when you sign in, it will take your ID and it will go to database and to your Firestore database and to your user collections and find for the ID that user that you logged in and give you all his data. That's why I'm using this package. It's pretty awesome. It also have a lot of features, but we'll basically only use that and the thing that it gives us on the action creators, and you will see in a second what I mean. So let's just save this. And now let's start configuring our Firebase project. So if you go to project overview here, you click on this, you will have this config object. Okay, so I don't recommend you expose your API key on your project, even though it doesn't matter here because you can't do anything with it. We'll configure our Firestore, so only each user can delete its own to-dos. But what we can do, if you don't want to expose it, we can copy it. So we can create a file on our root called .env.local. And here you have to name it like this because create React app is already set up in a way that it will automatically get access to this. And I think it's React app and then your name, so API key, and we will paste our key here. Oops. Okay, and this is basically ignored from the Git, but when it compiles it, we'll have access to it. Okay, so now that we have our API key here, we can close this up and let's start configuring our Firebase. So let's create a new file on the root called firebase.js. And here we'll basically import Firebase from firebase./app. We're gonna import Firebase/Firestore because we want to use Firestore, and import Firebase/Auth. And I'm not going to go super in depth here. You can check Firebase documentation. It's also super good, so I'm actually reading it right now. So, and now we can create a const here called config, and we'll pass our config file. So we pass it, but we don't want to show this here, so we can do process.env.react, and basically what you set up here, React app API key. Okay, and now we need to initialize our Firebase. So Firebase.initialize app, and you pass in your config object. And we also need to initialize Firestore since we want to use Firestore. So Firestore, and now we can export default our Firebase object. Actually, here it's not a capital letter, and we are exporting our Firebase that we imported from here, but right now we already initialized it, and we also initialized Firestore. So now we need to hook up Firestore to our store, okay, our Redux store. So we open our index.js in our store folder, and here we need to create a config object, as you can see here. I'm actually going to copy it. And what this basically does, it's saying that you want to use the user profile called users. So in our Firestore, it will look for the collection with the name users to load the profile of the user. And here, let's actually uncomment this. So use Firestore for profile set to true. Now let's import the Firestore that we exported from our Firestore file, and it's actually on store. It's from here, from Firebase, and it's actually Firebase, not Firestore. So now that we imported our Firebase from Firebase file we created here, we initialized it here. So we need to import, and this is called React Redux Firebase, and get Firebase from the package we installed that's called React Redux Firebase. Okay, so we imported this, and now here on our create store function we pass our root reducer, and then on this function that we use here, which will basically be the compose, we pass the apply middleware, right, to apply our Thunk middleware. But now we need to pass that function we imported, so it's called React Redux Firebase, and here on the first argument we pass the Firebase that we initialize, and as the second argument we pass this config. And now, to have access to this Firebase object on our Thunks, so on our action creators, here we need to use another thing called with extra argument, and here we pass in an object with the get Firebase. Okay, so we imported this from this package too, and we pass it to our middleware. So it's a middleware with an extra argument. Since we are also using the Redux Firestore package, and we are using Firestore instead of the default database from Firebase, we also have to import Redux Firestore and get Firestore, that's like this, from that package we installed called Redux Firestore. And here we use this Redux Firestore function, we pass it to Firebase, and to have access to the Firestore object on our Thunks, we also pass here the get Firestore we import. I'm missing a comma here. And everything should still be working. No. What were we doing wrong? We are importing Firebase from the wrong. Okay. Wait. Okay, we can't have our Firebase file here. So in our source folder, let's create a new folder. Let's call it Firebase. And here we can move this file to here. Move, and here now we import it from Firebase, and it should be working now. Okay, we don't have an API key because when we use env variables, we need to stop our server and then start our server again. So we're gonna stop our server and then we're gonna start our server again. And now everything should be working. Okay, everything is working. So I told you that this package goes to the Firestore and gets the user profile automatically. And to have access to that, we need to import something into our reducer. So we're going to go into our root reducer, and here we're going to import, and it's called Firebase reducer from that same package, React Redux Firebase, and now we can call it Firebase, and we say it's the Firebase reducer. And now if you go to our Redux, and if you go to our state, you can already see that you have another piece of state here. It's the Firebase object, and if you go, you will have an auth property that will say it is loaded true and is empty true because nobody is logged in. And you can see that there is something called profile, and this is where your data will be fetched automatically. So your data will appear here. So when this loads, you can see this sends some actions, and when the app loads, it will see if the user is logged in. If it is, it will take the ID of the user. It will go to Firestore and to the users collection and see if that ID appears here. If it exists, it will give you all this data here on your state, because we configured, if you remember, on our config, where is it here? We can say that we said that the user profile will use the users collection and that it will use Firestore for profile.